1G of the old Act 1956 in comparison to Section 164(2) of 2013 Act. Section 274(1)G did not lead to automatic vacation of office. If a person suffered a disqualification under Section 274(1)G, the only recourse, or rather the only effect of that was that the person could not be appointed as a director on the board of any other public company. Now, this Section 164 is applicable to both private as well as public companies, and if a person suffers a disqualification under Section 164(2), he can neither be appointed on the board of the company where he is a director, nor can he be appointed on the board of any other company. So therefore, the disqualification attaches and goes beyond the company where he is a director. And therefore, the corporate action also invites this, where he becomes disqualified for a period of 5 years. A person appointed as a director, as I said, cannot function unless he gives his consent. As I mentioned, 164, the main provision is of 164(1), which is the primary disqualification, and the second one is on corporate actions. And a private company can have additional disqualification. A public company cannot have any additional disqualification. Of course, unsound mind and undischarged insolvent, the basic provisions emanate from the law of agency as is given under the Contract Act. A director is in the position of a person in trust and discharges a fiduciary function. So therefore, a person cannot discharge functions as an agent if he otherwise is not competent to contract. So therefore, in line with this, a person of unsound mind or a person who is an undischarged insolvent cannot act on behalf of a company, hence he is required to vacate office. We had similar provisions even under the Companies Act 1956. In fact, apart from the provision under Section 274, Section 202 of Companies Act 1956 provided for a penal provision if a person was an undischarged insolvent acted on behalf of the company. The only difference between 164 in comparison to Section 202 was that in 202 the period of imprisonment was provided as 2 years, which now is a period of 1 year under the new Act. Where a person is applied for being declared an insolvent, he on his own is declaring that he is not a desirable person to continue in office, and hence there is a provision which prohibits him from being appointed as a director. And by virtue of Section 167, very clearly covering disqualifications, such a person would automatically vacate office also. When he is being convicted for an offence involving moral turpitude or otherwise. Now, this or otherwise is also a new addition under the new Act of 2013. Or otherwise, however, when the Act was initially introduced and when it was in the bill form as well as when the Act was passed, there was a lot of speculation as to what the words or otherwise would mean. The rules have set this at rest. Or otherwise, as is used under the provisions of Section 164(1) as well as 167(1), have been defined to mean provisions of Companies Act, which means if a person has been convicted of an offence under the provisions of Companies Act, then he would then be liable for disqualification and not otherwise. So it's not under the standards of weights and measures, that is, which is now become Packaged Commodity Rules, Packaged Commodities Act, or any other act. It's only provisions of Companies Act 2013 or Companies Act 1956. When an order disqualifying such a person has been passed by the tribunal, such an order can be passed under Section 242 of the Companies Act 2013, which basically is a follow of an application under Section 241. 241 is similar to 397, 398, dealing with operation and mismanagement, and 242 is when the tribunal intervenes and passes an order, and where it finds that the directors need to vacate office, it may pass an order for removal of the directors. It may also pass an order stating that the person is not desirable to be appointed as a director on the board of any other company. Of course, the last point is very similar to what we also had under the Companies Act 1956, where the person has not paid calls for a period of 6 months after it fell due. We've covered the provisions with respect to corporate action, and a director needs to have a DIN, as I mentioned, and after he is appointed, he needs to 8, and he needs to give his consent. First directors, yes, we did cover. Alternate additional nominee director and directors in casual vacancy. But before I move on to this, I just want to quickly cover directors retiring by rotation, which is very similar to Section 256 of the Companies Act 1956, where the board should comprise of 2/3 of its total strength, comprising of directors retiring by rotation, which means 1/3 the board can be non-retiring. This provision is very similar to what it was under the 56 Act, except that by virtue of the explanation to Section 152 subsection 6, for counting the total number of directors, you would not take into account independent directors, which means from the total number of directors, you would reduce independent directors, and from out of the balance, 2/3 should comprise of directors retiring by rotation. And from out of this 2/3, 1/3 the number of directors would be liable to retirement at every AGM every year. What is interesting is the term independent director has been defined under Section 2 subsection 47 of Companies Act 2013 as a director referred to in Section 149 subsection 4 of the Companies Act 2013, and Section 152(6), the explanation given under this subsection, states that independent director, whether appointed under this Act or any other law for the time being in force, which is precisely what has caused all the confusion, because the term independent director, as is referred to under Section 149 subsection 4 read with 149(6), very clearly states that a nominee director is not an independent director, and generally a person who is appointed under any other law for the time being in force is commonly referred to as a nominee director. Having said that, under Section 152, such persons, if they have been appointed under an Act, they would also be deducted while reckoning number of directors liable to retirement by rotation. So therefore, it might well so happen that in case of a company, if you consider the present board, presently directors who are treated as non-retiring may actually have to become retiring so as to compare with 2/3, 1/3. Because if a director has independent directors who are not liable to retirement by rotation and also has nominee directors appointed under IDBI Act or any other act for the time being in force, or may be central government nominees, then the other directors who are executive directors will actually have to become directors retiring by rotation. Of course, there is no bar on a managing director being liable to retirement by rotation. In case of additional directors, provisions under Section 161 subsection 1 is very similar to Section 260 of Companies Act 1956, except that there is a small addition over here. Under 161, it says that except a person who has failed to get appointed, in which case such a person, say for example, if a person has been proposed to be appointed as a director and the motion is defeated at an AGM, he cannot subsequently be appointed as an additional director by the board. Alternate director, the provision earlier stated that if a person were to be away from the state, you could appoint alternate directors. Under the new Act, you can appoint an alternate director only if the original director is likely to be away from the country for a period of 3 months or more, rather than from the state where the board meetings are held. And the moment the person comes back to the country, the director who is appointed in this case, the alternate director, will cease to hold office. So the major change is with respect to state and the country. Nominee director, of course, would be any person who is appointed under an agreement or under a law, as the case may be. Directors in casual vacancy is quite an interesting provision. It's very similar to provisions of Companies Act, except Companies Act 1956, except that in case of independent directors, the Act does not very specifically state that independent directors will have to be appointed only by the shareholders. A combined reading of Section 150 subsection 2 read with Section 152 subsection 2 read with Schedule 4 of course brings in an aspect of a person requiring approval from the shareholders and also needs to be appointed by the shareholders, but Section 152 subsection 2, which refers to appointment by the shareholders, starts with the words subject section 161, where the board has power to appoint a director, it would be clearly covered under this 152 subsection 2, which means if a person is appointed as an independent director by the shareholders and after 5 months he resigns from his office due to genuine reasons, any other person who is supposed to be appointed in his place can be appointed by the board, and such a resolution need not be placed before the shareholders because there is no provision under the Act requiring approval of the shareholders until the completion of the tenure. In fact, the rules as well as Schedule 4 require the vacancy to be filled in. Of course, the rules provide for 6 months, rules provide for 3 months, while the Schedule 4 provides for a period of 6 months, within which or the next board meeting, within which the vacancy needs to be filled up. So this probably is not intended. At the same time, going by a strict reading of the Act read to the rules, casual vacancy in the office of an independent director can be filled up by the board under section 164 subsection 4 of Companies Act 2013. Appointment of a person other than a retiring director is very similar to what we have in the provisions of Companies Act 1956, except that the amount of deposit has been increased from 500 to rupees 1 lakh. Very often I've been asked this question as to whether this check of 1 lakh needs to be deposited. It is necessarily required to be deposited. Otherwise, you would not be able to satisfy the requirement of refund of the money, and unless and until the money is deposited, you would not be able to confirm that the money has been received. And most companies who are going to be liable to secretarial audit, the secretarial auditor will have to also check. Where if it was 500, one can always say the money was received in cash. Because of 1 lakh, the money will have to be necessarily received by a check or otherwise. So therefore, it is essential to ensure that this particular check or draft is banked. This is another interesting provision with respect to liability of directors. Liability of directors, one would need to refer to section 259, 260, and with respect to non-executive directors, there is section 149, subsection 12, which says that director will be liable. A director who is not a full-time director and a non-promoter director or an independent director will only be liable if a wrongdoing has happened with his consent or connivance, or when he has not exercised due diligence. Now this term, due diligence, is a little vague, which actually means one would have to see as to what he was supposed to do, and it can be left to interpretation. And this will also lead to a lot of judicial interpretation over the years. If you refer to section 2, subsection 16, this term of due diligence, exercise of due diligence, does not feature in 2 subsection 16 in definitions of officer in default, while it is cropped up in section 149. So this will lead to a lot of interpretation as we go along. Remuneration, in case of independent directors, this is Companies Act has now made it very specific and clear that they would not be liable, they would not be entitled to stock options. Under SEBI guidelines, of course, there was a bit of a gap as to whether they can be given stock options. In fact, they could have been given if they were not holding shares exceeding a certain percentage and they are non-promoter, non-full-time directors. He may receive, an independent director will receive sitting fees, commission related to profits of the company, as well as monies towards towards expenses in attending meetings of the board of directors of the company. In fact, in comparison to the Companies Act 1956, the limit of 1% and 3% commission which can be paid to non-full-time directors now can actually be paid even without seeking shareholders' approval. The second proviso to section 197, subsection 1 of Companies Act 2013 states that you require permission of the shareholders only if you propose to pay more than 1% or 3% as the case may be. For the matter of 5%, 10% is also no longer a sacrosanct rule for payment of remuneration to the managing director or full-time director. And this can be exceeded if the shareholders approve such excess payment to be made. And the figure of 11% is also no longer very sacrosanct. You can pay more than 11%, organization is more or less the same except for one additional head which features in section 198. Sitting fees limit of 1 lakh has been provided for a meeting of the board of the company thereof. That's more or less with respect to provisions dealing with directors. Directors exercise their rights by participating in the meeting of the board of directors of the company. I'm just going to be covering a couple of issues with respect to meetings of the board, powers of the board, as well as related party transactions very briefly. I will not go into the nitty-gritties of RPTs because we're going to have another session on RPTs exclusively. Exercise of the powers of the board and rules relating to conduct of meeting and powers of the board are broadly the three topics that I'm going to be covering. The new act provides for notice of a board meeting to be given in writing at least 7 days before the meeting. Of course, there is a cover which has been provided. If the meeting where notice of less than 7 days has been given is attended to by an independent director, then this non-issuance of minimum notice period of 7 days, non-conformity with minimum notice period of 7 days can be waived and will not be attended. Otherwise, a person who has issued notice of less than 7 days becomes punishable for the same. The new act also specifically provides for holding the first board meeting within 30 days of incorporation. Statutorily, there is a time period within which the first board meeting is now required to be held. The old Act 1956 stated that we needed to have one board meeting every quarter. The 2013 Act states that we need to have one board meeting in 4 months, and the gap between two board meetings cannot exceed 120 days. Of course, there is a relaxation with respect to a 1% company or a defunct company, dormant company as it is called under the provisions of the Companies Act. So you have active and dormant companies, and for a company to be treated as a dormant company, there is a specific provision under section 455 of the Companies Act 2014. And once a company fulfills those requirements as given under section 455, then it just needs to have one board meeting in 6 months. And the gap between two board meetings should be not less than 90 days. So you cannot have a board meeting on the 30th of June and another one on the 1st of July. It needs to have minimum 90 days gap to ensure that it meets this requirement. Video conferencing is not permitted. Apart from video conferencing, you can actually have any other audio-visual means, but pure audio means is not permitted, which means you can't have teleconferencing. You need to have video facility along with teleconferencing. Of course, the rules prescribe a very detailed procedure, and the board member is required to intimate the company beforehand that he will be participating on a video conference. The company is not obliged to give a VC facility. It's not essential that every company needs to give this. The director, in fact, can even seek leave of absence and not participate in the meeting at all. But if the company desires to give a VC facility, then it needs to get the request from the directors beforehand. It needs to get a confirmation from the director as to whether they would like to participate on VC, and then make necessary arrangements and elaborate arrangements and elaborate requirements have been described under Rule 20, which needs to be then complied with. There are certain resolutions which cannot be passed in a meeting which is transferred over video conferencing. In fact, it's very interesting to know that the rules refer to meeting not being conducted over VC. So it does not say that resolutions cannot be passed. It refers to the meeting not being conducted, which means even if one item of business relates to this, you cannot conduct a meeting, which probably is not the intention, but the way the rule has been framed, it says the meeting cannot be conducted, which possibly will undergo changes. Resolutions, there are certain resolutions which can only be passed at a meeting of the board of directors. There are certain resolutions which there is no requirement to pass at a meeting of the board of directors, can be passed by circulation. And as I mentioned, there are resolutions which can also be passed over a VC except ones which cannot be considered in a video conference. With respect to resolutions which can be passed by circulation, there is a very interesting provision which says that if more than board wants the item to be discussed in a board meeting and does not want the resolution to be passed by circulation, then the resolution cannot be considered by circulation. Which means the board has the authority to seek discussion on a particular matter. This actually puts a lot more of emphasis on the board procedure, as well as the duty is cast to the directors to take an active part in saying that he needs more details and therefore he does not want the resolution to be passed by circulation. And which is the reason the provision which deals with liability of directors also refers to board procedures and states that the liability would be reckoned by considering the board procedure. And the board procedure is mainly in the form of notice, agenda and minutes. And if you refer to section 118, which is similar to section 193 of the 1956 Act, very specifically states that dissent of the directors should be noted. So it is for the directors to ensure that points brought out by them are clearly recorded in the minutes if they are not in agreement with the matter in discussion. Quorum, there's a very interesting dichotomy with respect to quorum. The provisions of 1956 Act are reasonably clear on quorum for board meeting, and of course the broad provision remains the same. 1/3 the board, being not less than 2 directors, would form quorum, which is exactly the way section 174 of the Companies Act 2013 reads. And if you have interested directors, the remaining directors, being not less than 2, shall form quorum. That takes us to the basic question as to who is an interested director. The term interested director has been defined under section 2 subsection 49 of the 2013 Act, and the way the term is defined is very similar to the way it was defined in the 1956 Act. If a director is in any way interested in a particular contract arrangement which is entered into or proposed to be entered into, whether directly or indirectly, he would be deemed to be interested. But if you refer to the provision dealing with quorum, which is section 174, in particular, explanation under section 174 subsection 3 states that a director will be deemed to be interested if he is covered under section 184 subsection 2 of Companies Act 2013, which means only if a director is covered under section 184 subsection 2, which has 2 parts, A and B, will such a director not be counted for quorum. Which means if a director is otherwise interested under section 2 subsection 49 but does not fall under section 184 subsection 2, then it would be counted for quorum. That does not say he can participate, it only says he can be counted for quorum. And if you refer, do you have any cases where a person would fall under 2 subsection 49 but would not fall under 184 subsection 2? Of course you would have cases, because 184 subsection 2 has 2 parts. The first one deals with a person, a director, who is interested in any other body corporate by virtue of his being a director or holding shares along with other directors of not less than 2%. And the reference there is to a body corporate, not to a company, because there may be other entities registered in India which may all be covered over there, which is fine. So which means the first one is a test based on shareholding, where a director along with other directors holds not less than 2% in the shareholding of another body corporate. The second one refers to partnership firms and private companies. It says that a director is a partner in a partnership firm or an owner of a sole proprietary concern or is a member in a private company. So, section 184 deals only with direct interest of the director. It says if the director himself is a sole proprietor or a partner in a partnership firm or a member in a private company or a director in a private or a public company or along with other directors holds more than 2%. Let's consider a situation where the director's wife is a sole proprietor or the director's wife is a partner in a partnership firm. It would not fall under direct interest, and therefore this would not fall under section 184 subsection 2 of Companies Act 2013, and therefore will have an issue with respect to passing of the resolution. Related party versus that's exactly what I covered, and circulation we did cover it. There are different committees which have been prescribed under the Act. I suppose committees are being dealt with separately. No? Okay. Audit committee is very closely linked to independent directors because the provisions of section 149(4) read with rule 4 of the directors' appointment and qualification of directors' rules states that if a company meets the threshold as is given under rule 4, it will need to have at least 2 independent directors. However, it will need to have more than 2 if provisions of other sections of the Act deem it to have more than 2. And the main provision is with respect to section 177, which deals with audit committees. In case of an audit committee, majority of the directors should be independent directors. So therefore, if you have only 3 members of the audit committee, you will need to have 2 independent directors. But if you have more than 5 directors in the audit committee, you will necessarily need to have at least 3 independent directors and so on. What's very important is on the audit committee, the frame of reference of an audit committee has become more specific and has been enhanced under the provisions of Companies Act 2013. Nomination and Remuneration Committee has also been provided for, and with respect to payment of remuneration to directors for any other professional services, under section 197, approval of the Nomination and Remuneration Committee will be required. Let's consider a situation where you have one of your directors is a professional director who is either a chartered accountant or a lawyer, and you need to seek advice from such a director. Going by the provisions of independent directors, and independent directors cannot receive any remuneration other than sitting fees and expenses with respect to attending board meetings or profit-related commission. But the count is given under section 197, which says that if a person is paid any professional fees towards professional services, then such amount can be paid provided the same is cleared by the Nomination and Remuneration Committee. Mind you, just because the Nomination and Remuneration Committee approves it, it does not automatically come outside the purview of section 188, which deals with related party transactions, because one will necessarily need to once again cover it under the provisions of 188. So which means you would initially have the Nomination and Remuneration Committee considering this and approving it and stating that the person possesses requisite skills and that the amount is reasonable. The basis on which the Nomination and Remuneration Committee considers the fees to be reasonable will then have to be placed before the Audit Committee under section 177 if the Nomination and Remuneration Committee finds the fees to be reasonable, which it will, otherwise it will fall under section 197.